Professors and university employees of Reddit, what behind the scenes campus drama went on that students never knew about. In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another graduate student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their foods and drinks, colorless, odorless, flavorless. Thanks to his chemistry knowledge, he was eventually caught and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. 2 professors arrested for meth production, one for murdering his wife with lab supplies, another stepped down quietly for embezzlement, and that's how we replaced half our chemistry department in a year. I'm noticing a trend between chemistry and murder in this post. When I was going through my PhD program, a buddy of mine had his professor die on him. Young guy, in his 40s, got hit by a car. Boom. Not so fun fact, when a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing, just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his 2nd year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab, essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Woo, grad school, so uplifting. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student, to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class and whoever was in the back row were scouters too. Let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. I knew a guy who was well liked and respected, and had several $1 million NIH grants that he was overseeing. He was well known in the international community and everyone treated him as an expert in his field. He'd been working in the field for a couple of decades. Then he stopped coming to conferences. Turns out, he had faked all of his credentials. He hadn't even graduated from high school. Apparently lying about degrees is a huge no when it comes to grant funding, and the school he was working for lost all of the grants in his name. It was sad to hear about it since he had done such great work, and fooled pretty much everyone because he was so knowledgeable. Currently it's that head of one of our research institutes and few of his colleagues somehow awarded themselves about $1 million each as a bonus. In my country it takes about 70 years of work on average salary to get that money. Also the same prof possibly forged some data in paper 10 years ago. Who knows how it's gonna end, but sure more dirt is being pulled on other PPL as well. Our heads of department or course directors would purposely keep dragging students. The act of pulling a student through their studies, even though they'd fail most classes, they'd purposely grade the student just above the pass even though the content of work was astonishingly bad, because if they left or dropped out it'd look bad on the course's stats and dropout rate. Not to mention the university not getting the student loan money. From there, of course statistics would be ridiculously high for that particular degree, so they'd then sell this to prospective students and parents. This is currently still going on. Source: I'm a lecturer at a university and yes, it disgusts me. My PI, professor, for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, one of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s/90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some meth. Very easy to do with the equipment we have, from what I'm told. This student would stay late in lab after others had left. To get this done, in Breaking Bad style, he fences his drugs to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his drugs was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing. Since none of this was under his direct control, and all campus resources were being misused by the student, State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they had seen in the state at this time. Prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way, and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened. He resigned and moved 3,000. This was exaggerated by about 2,000 miles away very quickly. No news, no public info released. It was all just known through the grapevine of staff. You mean, aside from the normal infighting between factions, character assassination carried out in formal language at review promotion tenure committee meetings, grad student poaching, running crying to a dean, etc. I think students would be surprised just how much drama happens. I'm talking everything from major drama like lawsuits that universities have kept quiet, Oreo complaints to colleagues bitching at each other because one thought the other one rolled her eyes at the other one. I just went to a faculty meeting that was so tense and angry that I legitimately wanted to leave the room, and it was over a small wording difference of opinion and a policy that literally does not matter because it is departmental and not university wide, so it's going to get struck down anyway. Sometimes I'm happy to go to class or meet with students in my office because that is the fun part of the job, and usually drama free until the last week of classes when everyone starts hustling for a higher grade. I used to be a custodian at a prominent university, and one of the TAs in the art department would routinely leave her studio a pigsty and then assured her students not to sweat the mess. We are just giving the janitor something to do. A number of students complained about her sense of entitlement, and she was rejected for a professorship for calling me a janitor instead of the proper nomenclature. Custodian. Night shift janitor made some really good moonshine. Some of the professors and grad students would leave cash in our top desk drawers when we left work, and the next day, a mason jar of handmade shine would be waiting there. He's since moved on from that department, but was good people. Professor came to a student house party and started doing heroin. Nobody ratted on him. Professor here. 10 of us went out for drinks one night. Tempers flared. Egos got involved. Trivial Pursuit was the game. History professors vs science professors. 5 on 5. Losers had to run across the quad at midnight, naked. Students missed out on 5 incredibly intelligent, highly dignified, very respected, completely nude and blushing science professors streaking across the green lawn. It used to be said of politics on the university campus that it was the worst of all kinds of politics because the stakes were so small. Charles Frankel, source work at a state university. Only 3 students knew about this. My roommate made drug stops, which was somewhat common knowledge, but we had something really weird happen. Our math professor hit us up a few times. I was with him at the time and he had a terrified look on his like he was caught for sure. But then he said, "Can I get some of that?" He was then his best customer for the next 2 years, and we told no one, and no student to our knowledge found out. I was a grad student in a major university. The department pretty much all loathed one another, and the professors had multiple alliances that were probably more complex than any game of CIV you'll play. At one point in time, a group of professors had aligned to overthrow the dean, and they were so successful in doing so that the dean wasn't fired, they were demoted to department secretary. It was brutal. I had a colleague who had people on their doc committee get into an argument and refused to sign off on anything they did, not because of the quality of the work, but because the professors hated each other. Graduate students are treated like trash. We are cheap labor, so the tenured professors can keep publishing without doing anything, and the professors looking for tenure can get the publications they need. Basically, the entire publish or perish culture in academia is really toxic. Unless you get lucky with a nice advisor, you're screwed. Also, university administration cares nothing for graduate students. At my school, our president announced a cash appreciation gift to every staff person making under a certain amount. Every graduate student on campus thought that included us as well, because to every logical person, we are staff eligible for benefits and work full time. Nope, we are only students when it's convenient for the university and makes their numbers look good, and considered staff only because we are getting paid barely above the poverty line. At least I get health insurance. Source, grad student who once was all bright-eyed and excited about academia. It's a toxic place. I work at a college in the Midwest. A few years ago, our president very quickly resigned. Turns out his son was growing weed in their basement and was selling out of their house. Whether the president knew or not is still being debated, but he still resigned. Apparently there were quite a few rich kids who didn't study, go to class, contribute, or maintain a GPA above a 3.0 whose parents shockingly paid for them to get into those schools. Say it isn't so. Academia sometimes draws ridiculous people. I had a dean once who caused so much turmoil so often by simply denying objective reality when it didn't suit her. I remember spearheading a project to repurpose a section of our building. I got the plans and she refused to believe the blueprints on square footage, so I measured it myself. She pretended it wasn't the case. It wasn't large enough to accommodate its new purpose. But according to her it was because in her mind it was 30% larger. I went over her head and ended up in meetings with higher administration trying to get them to understand. They all took her side. She proceeded to make my life hell for the remainder of my time at the university. It's often speculated or rumored that university professors are sometimes attracted to their students, but it can work the other way, as was the case with me when I was teaching music history. One female student sat as close as she could get, followed me around, and was always doing extra things to win favor to the point where it became obvious to her peers. Rather than embarrass this student by discussing it with her directly, or fellow staff members and the dean, I patiently wound her down gradually over time until she eventually got the idea nothing would come of it. I had an advanced calculus teacher who'd come into class stoned out of his mind. He'd write down equations on the board from a book, and about 15 to 20 minutes in, he'd invariably excuse himself and take a bathroom break. He'd then return, coked out of his mind, and proceed to solve all equations in less than 5 minutes and non-stop monologued about the topic for another 5. Then dismissed the class and stormed out. Invariably, if you actually understood or not, most students seemed physically stunned and dazed by the whole process. I don't know whether he was a freaking genius or a deranged drug fiend, but I studied in a big university at the time, and recently I heard he was made head teacher of the math department, so I don't know what to think. I work for a prominent university in Japan. My Japanese colleagues tend to follow all rules very strictly and blindly follow manuals. One day an American professor had to rush to the US to see his dying mother. The staff members of class operations called him as he was grieving, asking him to still teach classes and review reports. Obviously, the lack of empathy and inflexibility lead the professor to take his bags and work for another school. Students never knew the true reason why he stopped teaching. You have been visited by the smart studying doggo. You'll be blessed with good grades only if you subscribe to Comment Awards and like the video. PG! On top, food chain, won't stop, new game, hot box that blue haze, one lock, 2 chains, no bras, 2 babes, mic drop, new stage, lights in my rear view, 5 cops, full race, faster than a Tesla, they say I'm exhausted.